If you can fundamentally think like my team can be 2x more impactful today and therefore build 2x more products, we can, have 2x more impactful conversations. For the first time in decades, the cost of engineering is dramatically dropping. The Superman suit that makes you even better at your job, it doesn't replace you, but it really helps you be out of the gate that much smarter, that much more effective.
Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. I explore how ecosystems are built and how tech shapes the future. Austin is the frontier. It's where innovation takes root and new myths are made. Join what's next. Dru, welcome to Austin Next.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
So I'm going to just start kind of level setting. Talk to me about AffiniPay, what you guys do, and how that fits into the financial and fintech landscape.
Yes. So we do software, payments, and other financial services for solo and small law and accounting firms. And so simply put, we have 70,000 law firms and accounting firms that use our core software and fintech services to run their practice.
So, okay, is this like TurboTax on steroids? And it's a funny debate that I always get into with my wife when we're about tax time, because it's always this thing of like, well, they're just using the same software that we are, so why should we go to an outsource? So what exactly is the stack that they're using?
So think about it as lightweight ERP and CRM to run your business, along with a simple and compliant way to get paid. And then we're going to be launching a spend management credit card. So think Brex or Ramp for a law firm or an accounting firm. We're going to offer loans so that they can fund their practice. So it's basically, a cloud-based software platform that lets them do timekeeping, calendaring, case management, every kind of corner of the business of law or business of accounting. And embedded into it are core financial services, first and foremost, the ability to get paid.
I recently did an episode with Nick Tipman, a VC at TipTop, about vertical AI. And we were getting in this kind of debate about or not debate, a good discussion of when is general purpose needed versus when do you have this kind of specificity that you need. So, I mean, a lot of the things that you're saying sound small business. Like, why do you need a particular platform just for these groups?
Yeah, well, I've spent my whole career in vertical SaaS. And so the reality is the workflows are different enough, right? And so oftentimes in our industry, well, I can tell you half of the small law firms out there have not yet adopted legal specific practice management, and they're working across Microsoft Office, Google Office, DocuSign, kind of disparate, maybe even PayPal, frighteningly enough. And so they have these different kind of workflows that in reality they need to bring together. And what we see is when people adopt legal practice management, they get 3+ hours back a day because there's a lot of benefit to having, their client intake with their case management, with their timekeeping, with their invoicing, with their payments. And so it's the traditional unlock that you would get from kind of a full stack software platform built with you specifically in mind. I'm sure podcast businesses have like specific workflows that are relatively different or different enough than a law firm would have or an accounting firm would have. And we even see between lawyers and accountants, there's different enough workflow that you wouldn't sell kind of our MyCase suite to an accounting firm because of the way they bill their time, right? And bill their work.
This is always a constant problem with any sort of multi-tool platform of, best in class versus the stack. I mean, obviously you want to have each piece being the best in class, but there's only so much, dollars to be spent on R&D. So how do you position the ability of it all linked together versus, well, I can have the best payment method. I can have the best. I would think about like Teams, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's great that Microsoft Teams has it all put together, but it's crap.
So I have to say, I think usually the stack wins, right? The ability to kind of have a unified, and I'm like a unified data model where I can fully understand everything about this customer, everything about this case, soup to nuts. Oftentimes where we've failed is like there's the theoretical dream that all technology is integratable in this kind of very deep way that feels seamless. That's just
It's
not the
not. It's not. It doesn't
reality.
all magically work together in the best possible way.
Yeah, and so I think like if you were to take your kind of non-verticalized view, right? I think, for example, Slack, which we use, which we love, Zoom, there's been a handful of disruptors that have come in and kind of justified their ability to kind of peel away from a Google or a Microsoft key components of the stack. But also predicated on that is, they're solving a meaningful enough problem and they have very easy integrations, right? So I think you definitely, as firms mature, you still see, larger firms are going to have kind of a different document management platform than, for example, our smallest firms will be using us for document management. And we recognize that as firms get bigger, they may have kind of case management be on one platform, and we need to have really robust integrations, for example, with NetDocs, which is something we're launching. Not that you need to know that, not that you really care about legal tech, but I think oftentimes like the ability for the stack to win, and the things to be good enough, but the value of the integration, the value of it all being in one place, the value of going into one system to spend your day is really powerful. And so I think a lot of what we think about is how should that stack evolve and where do we want to build it? Where do we want to partner for it? Where would we even buy it? And so that's part of why my job's fun, is because we got to keep making that stack better and better to meet the evolving needs of our customers, right?
How do you think about the timing of when to go in and build on the stack? I mean, you think about looking
Constantly.
at
I mean, it's SaaS. And I would say I think it was interesting that you were having the conversation in the context of generative AI, right? Because I think that's going to be legal's the number two targeted industry for disruption by Gen AI. I think there's a
yeah,
lot.
Harvey just raised another gigantic round, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, look, that probably says more about VC frothiness than anything else, but I think and that's probably a separate podcast, not to be spicy, but anywhere you see kind of heavy knowledge work, right? And we see it a ton of opportunity for it where we've been investing in building it for the past 2 years. And I think there's going to be a lot of transformation. And I think there's very specific opportunities for lawyers and accountants, the need for it to also be kind of fully integrated with their data, the industry specific data, the legal research specifically. And so I think you're going to see the need for kind of legal specific use cases. But the way technology works is that doesn't mean underpinning it isn't kind of these horizontal kind of capabilities, different models, et cetera. Right. So it's an exciting time. And I think it's fun to be in an industry. Vertical SaaS was generally overlooked by venture capitalists because they thought the markets were too small. So it's interesting to be in a market. And I saw it in my last company, which was a prop tech company where a lot of enthusiasm came in. And then there are challenges to serving a vertical market that you have to get comfortable with. And some VCs are and some aren't. So we'll see how it all shakes out as all this money flows in.
Well, one of the things I was thinking more about the timing is that we look at like Zoom's trajectory, right? And with I don't remember what the stock prices were, but like way higher than it is now, kind of at that moment. And obviously that was the
Well, those were
moment.
COVID times. And 2021 was an anomaly. I think every investor, when they're having a good dream, thinks about 2021 and the heyday of 2021.
Well, so I agree that the stock was realistically high, but that also was the moment that they should have then built on the stack because they had that, they had the stock to play with. So like that's the tension, right? Is like, okay, one is to your point, how do you think about challenging the assumptions? Because clearly the assumption they based off of like this is the world going forward. And so our video conferencing software is everything versus if they had gone to think about the productivity stack instead, it would have been a very different moment we're looking at for them.
Yeah, look, I'm not venture backed, right? And I don't view how much money we've raised and what our valuation is as our top line metric for success. I think where companies kind of can lose their way is loss of focus on the customer, right? At the end of the day, the investor is not your customer. And so, I mean, we are constantly finding new ways to kind of grow and serve our customers. And if you do that and you put their happiness and their growth at the forefront, that allows you to take a mid to long term view, right? I mean, we've been investing in verticalized embedded fintech for 3+ years. It's not even a cool thing. It's not a thing anyone talks about. And yet we had this thesis that yes, law firms are and accounting firms are underserved from a software perspective and ability to kind of really transform their practice with software. But hand in hand is the need to access capital, the need to drive out financial inefficiencies. Like lawyers only get paid for about 75% of the work that they do. They lose tens of thousands of dollars a month in unreimbursable expenses. If you ask them, it is easier for them to get a mortgage than it is to get a $10,000 line of credit. And so we see massive opportunities to unlock, the power of a financially well practice by providing inline embedded fintech tools. No one else is really doing that. I mean, I think Stripe is doing it broad based and Square has done it, but like with a verticalized mindset and really looking at kind of core underwriting models and like how do you actually have better data and use the data that we have in order to address these underserved segments of the market in small business. And so I think for us, like it's not about what's our valuation and therefore how do we invest, but it's more about how do we constantly challenge ourselves to do more for our customers and be investing ahead of that. I think one thing, having transitioned from being a consultant to an investor to an operator, and now I've been an operator much longer than I've done either of the other two, is like you have a recognition that it is much harder and takes much longer and way more investment to build new products, right? And to even elevate your existing products. And so you have to have kind of a time frame that is very different than investors or consultants think you should. And so you have to be investing way ahead. And to your point, you can learn from other companies where they underinvested and therefore missed big waves of opportunity that should have rightfully been theirs. And so you have to have a healthy paranoia about that. And I think that's how we feel about Gen AI today is like we should be one of the primary, if not the first provider of Gen AI, because we are on the business of law side. So some of this legal research, hallucination concerns don't really apply to us. Similarly, we feel like we should be the primary provider of financial services. We invented legal payments, in essence, digital legal payments 15 plus years ago, our founder did. So we take a very midterm view and are fortunate to have investors that support that. But to your point, I think the worst thing you can do is look back and feel like you missed a big opportunity to serve your customers and therefore grow your business and grow your enterprise value.
Legal is probably one of the edge cases for this, where AI is so drastically changing like the business model. So if they're charging for like, hey, here's all the associates go do this legal research, and I'm billing you per hour, and now I can do it at a click of a button. Obviously, an overrepresentation, but like the model then completely changed. Especially, I think you on the fintech side, like how are you thinking about those evolutions and then the products that you need to build if that changes or
Yeah.
as it changes?
I mean, I think first and foremost, and look, I don't think this is a problem unique to legal. I think
I
it's a
think legal's on the getting hit by it first in many ways.
well, I mean, software is, right? Isn't you it's a price per seat model, right? And so we have to kind of think through
Yes.
agentic AI has the opportunity to eliminate headcount from our end customers, right? And so how does that manifest in pricing and how do you kind of price to value versus price per seat? And so I think part of what the legal industry and look, I have a personal view of this because I went to law school. My best friend's an attorney. She's no longer a partner at a law firm. She's a GC at a very large tech company. But it was horrible being a young mom, making partner, trying to find clients, trying to find hours to bill and actually serve clients, and then doing the even when she was part of a broader law firm, doing the administrative work of all the timekeeping and so the billable hour in some ways is kind of the golden handcuffs that lawyers have imposed upon themselves, if we're being honest. Bankers don't have that issue. God bless them. Like having gone through like 3 successful exits and worked on many transactions, like bankers kind of got that we're going to get paid on value and the more you make, the more we make. And like I love that for them. And so I think this is actually an opportunity for law firms to reimagine their fee structure that better aligns the work that they do to the value and break free. And hopefully in the process, it could actually make the profession a lot more attractive to people like, who are trying to have families and trying to have some balance. And I think technology can give them a ton of leverage in the work that they do. We're taking a Gen AI first approach inside of our company. Like all knowledge work should start with whether we've approved them to use Gemini or ChatGPT, like that's a great foundational starting point to write an email, draft a document, draft a memo, draft a presentation, do source research. And I'm talking about our team. I think the same thing is true for lawyers, right? So we are seeing rise of kind of more fixed fee. And look, there are counterbalancing ethical concerns. So if you're trying, you can't just kind of like add up what it would have cost and then charge that. So there's sorting through to be done. I think we're going to see a lot of change over the next 3, 5 plus years. One thing I can guarantee though is lawyers provide incredibly valuable services. And if there's kind of fewer lawyers and more technology doing that work, they're still going to have a very good business because many things can't happen without the work that they do and without their intelligence and guidance that we need. So I'm not concerned. I think the other optimistic view of it is many people find legal access to justice, access to legal services too expensive, right? And so we know that there's a massive amount of demand that is not being met because of the current price model in the market. And so my hope is that you also see the rise of legal services that are very reliable, that can address many of the needs of people today who cannot afford them. And so I think the democratization, if you want to call it something cool, of access to legal services is something that we should see. Now, I think if you look at the accounting profession, it's going to be transformational, and in some ways the gift of this technology came at the perfect time. I saw the president of AICPA speak on this almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's what is this organization?
It's like the equivalent to the American Bar Association. So it's the American CPA. So, so everyone's a member. It's like, he's the big cheese when it comes to kind of understanding how the industry is transforming. And it's like half the number of accountants graduate every year than are needed inside of practices, right? And so he was saying, we used to count on this triangle model. We have basically half the number of people to fill the bottom of the triangle that we need. And so I think agentic services, agents, whatever you want to call it, who can provide more leverage to actually support and meet the current demand for accounting services and frankly provide the horsepower needed to run these firms is coming at the perfect time for accountants. So I think there's massive opportunity in both of the industries. I do think back to your question, the good news is like usually there was a big lag between horizontal moving into vertical, right? And the ability to take horizontal technologies a la FinTech, right? I mean, we're partnered with a firm, for example, and they had been doing consumer lending for over a decade before, we partnered with them and had a vertical application for legal services and accounting services, right? Now, because of the rate of innovation and acceleration for Gen AI technologies that are like moving at a pace no one has ever seen before, I think you're going to see vertical application much faster. Not just because people write big checks for Harvey, but because we know there's massive use cases and the technology is getting, frankly, commoditized. And I mean that in a good way, accessible at a pace that we've never seen before. So lots of opportunity, lots of excitement. And I think there's going to be kind of winners and losers that we look back on in 2, 3, 5 years. So we hope to be in the winners camp, but I don't want to judge the CEO of Zoom too harshly because I think everyone has opportunities that were missed. Yeah. We love Zoom. Yeah. And actually, I would say pitch for Zoom. We have Zoom deployed for our customer support team, and they've been probably the area where we could light up their Gen AI capabilities for our support team the fastest and have the most impact. And so they're actually pretty ahead relative to some of the other kind of larger like platforms that we're leveraging to run our company today. So kudos to them on Gen AI. They didn't miss that.
But it's a perfect example of to your entire point about like the virtualization and the use cases. I used to do the podcast via Zoom, would just record and then do editing and all that on the side. I use a platform called Riverside now that is literally it's everything, right? We're talking on it now. I can do all the editing on it. I can do clips. I can do. And what's amazing is in these kind of cases is like the AI turnout, like it gives transcripts, it gives titles, it gives all these kind of things that you can kind of start with. They're like, oh, this is a great starting point.
It'll even tell you if you did a good job. It'll be like, Jason, you really nailed that one. Okay.
So it's funny you said it hasn't done that yet, but I will say there was one episode that I felt I was a little aggressive in the conversation on punchy. That's a good way to put on. It was on angel investing, and I literally took. 'Cause I'm an early stage investor, and so I want angel investing to be good in the way that they do it and so forth.
Yeah, totally.
I literally, after it was over, I took the transcript to Claude, ChatGPT, and both said, "Can you rate like how aggressive I was on this?" I kind of stopped at the end. Like, I might have been a little much. But I think both of them gave me a 6. So I was like, I can live.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I think the tools that we're using in both support and in sales can read kind of sentiment and can like we're using it to be like, hey, here's everything you need to cover in the conversation. Did you cover these stages? And like there's 4 key areas you have to flush out salesperson, right? Or support person, like how did that go? So I think the sentiment analysis and I could report back in by the end of the year and let you know we're going to have it start predicting whether or not they think the customer will close, for example. And so we'll get to run it as like you have the salesperson's call, and then you've got the sales manager's hedge on whether or not how that optimistic that, and then we'll have kind of the Gen AI call on whether or not based on that conversation the deal is going to close. So
So
I
how do
think
you think about that culturally? I used when I was at Illumina, the big genomic sequencing company, in commercial strategy, and we had all of these dreams and thoughts about exactly the kinds of stuff that you were talking about. But we were still at the place of like, could you just put your deal into Salesforce? Like, I can't do any of this really sentiment analysis, any of this stuff if you don't start with just like tell us what you're doing, be on the call, all these kinds of things. And it was always kind of this funny tension because like we had such great like opportunities to do all the things that you're talking about, but there's this very basic, I'm gonna go out like say like, and that's why they're good at sales. I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna go do my job and like just like give me the things to make it easier rather than kind of the surveillance feeling. So how do you think about it culturally to we need the data, we need the buy-in to use these tools, both from at your company versus then, of course, you're selling these kinds of tools to others.
yeah. Well, I have a couple thoughts on this. So I'll make kind of a macro comment and then I'll talk about Gen AI and culture. So don't let me forget the second point, lest I wax too poetic. I mean, I think part of why anyone who's looking at Gen AI feels like we're both behind, but if you feel behind, maybe you're ahead, is because it's like the new technology that has had the fastest consumer adoption history, right?
Five
And
to eight to
so
100 million people or something ridiculous.
yeah, and I think, look, I love the fact that we serve a tech lagging industry. And I say that with a lot of love in my heart because I think it's the job of the technologist and the person building the product to like meet the customer where they are. And so it kind of challenges like our new chief product officer, her background is in design. And we think that's an area that like shame and us, we've way underinvested. And like it's our job to make things easy and accessible because our job is to be giving people time back and to provide value. It's not a lawyer and accountant's job to like learn technology, right? Their job is to serve their clients. And so I think we're going to see and one thing that's been really interesting to me cuz not most of my friends aren't in tech, that's one of the things I love about Austin is like when we were in San Francisco it was like a bubble and everyone was, kind of like
You're
their
either in
job.
tech or you're not, or you're
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And if you weren't, you were like a doctor or a lawyer. That was like kind of the kind of the landscape. And but here it's like I have a ton of friends and they use it for all different things. Like for what am I going to cook tonight and menu planning and like what's my horoscope for today and like is this a good price for these jeans? And so it's like how am I going to plan my trip and how do I don't want to hire a travel agent. So there's all these use cases and I think because the interface feels so conversational, right? And it's so integrated with actionability. Like it's constantly wanting to make me a PDF or a Word document or an Excel tracker of like, you know, whatever I'm doing. And I'm like, no, 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 it's okay. I don't need all that. I'm on my phone. It's good. So I think we are going to see, and one thing that we've learned over and over is like where consumer goes, so too goes kind of B2B SaaS and technology. And so I do think there's going to be rapid adoption. You see it in like we have a wonderful immigration platform. Half the law firms said they expect to be adopting Gen AI. Like You see it in the data. Now, what that means and how it moves from nascent to operational to key and strategic, I think that's going to be a whole journey. I mean, we're on the journey and we're scaled and we have people and resources put against it. And even, we struggle with like an overabundance of tools and opportunities and so I don't think it means tomorrow everyone's going to be running off of Gen AI native tools to run their business. But I think we should know that like consumers are loving it and using it, and it's has this virality that we should expect it will then become kind of core table stakes for software, right? And business software. And then inside of our company, I mean, look, I think one thing that people have learned, and if you talk to other leaders, is like, there has to be there has to be like a top down commitment to having a Gen AI first mindset and culture. And so, like, I, as the CEO, my exec team, like, we are all really excited and locked arms about it. And we are kind of cascading that within the organization and we're firming up like the expectations around that, right? But hand in hand with that has to go the support and the evangelizing it and saying, like, I expect everyone to be using a Gen AI tool to help you be more productive and more successful. It could be 10%, it could be 50%, depending on the role. But I'm going to train you on it and I'm going to share use cases where people are having success and I'm going to like fund the best tools out there so it really works for you. And so I do think, it started off a couple of years ago where people were like, let's just test and learn and people will find their way through it into, I think we're seeing, and I think, for example, like you've seen a company like Shopify, which is super innovative, global. And Toby, the founder CEO, is like, look, this is an expectation. Just like I would say, you cannot be a salesperson in our company if you do not put your shit in Salesforce. That deal doesn't count. Like it does, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't count, right? And we've been saying that for many years. And I think that's going to be a little bit where we go with Gen AI is like, this is just table stakes expectations. And I was talking to a senior AI leader from Indeed, and he was like, we talked about it as like, it's kind of the Superman suit that makes you even better at your job. It doesn't replace you, but
Yeah.
it really helps you be out of the gate that much smarter, that much more effective. Like, and look,
Anybody that thinks they're going to be replaced by AI is going to be replaced by somebody using AI.
that's 100% true. It's like, and look, what a great opportunity if you were a support person answering like 30% of our tickets are password changes. And like, if we could get a Gen AI person tool to do that, then you can actually talk to customers about stuff that's not just resetting their password, right? I think I heard the CEO, who's now the CEO of Starbucks, I saw him on a panel 18 months ago, and he was talking about at Chipotle, like robotics. And he's like, what we did with robotics is we had robots come in and do the jobs that no one wanted to do in the kitchen, like fry the tortilla chips. Like no one wanted to be there, like over a giant vat of oil, and he's like, we used it to like mix the guacamole, right? Which is like a hard, laborious. So that put more people at the front with customers, helping them build their bowls or whatever they do at Chipotle. So I think it's a great opportunity to like transform. And one thing that we think a lot about is because we're private equity backed, like and I think the world has gone this way. We believe in profitable growth. And look, the cost of engineering, the cost of sales, the cost to support your customers, all those are being dramatically reduced very quickly, right? If you adopt these tools and you both unlock productivity with individuals and you fully automate away processes, and that gives us a massive opportunity to invest more in our customers, more in innovation, new products, more people kind of serving them in ways we potentially wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. So I think it's going to be transformational. I think it's going to be exciting. And I think it's going to be a journey that's going to take a bit of time.
And it completely changes the way you think about company building. I remember Toby put out like the Shopify memo. It was like, okay, if you're going to hire somebody, like the first question is, can AI do this? And then
100%.
it was Moderna, which their CTO and their head of people merged into one role because
Yeah.
it was now thinking of like, it's that taking what Toby said to the next level. It was like, everything is about how we scale and process. And your first question is this a tool? Is this infrastructure? Is this AI? Is this an agent? Or is this a person? And then once you answer that question, then you go and go get whatever's necessary.
I agree with him. I mean, I think that is the right question, right? And we're going to find many areas where it's like, yes, I still need a person, but I need a different person, and I need to make sure that that person is comfortable and fluent in Gen AI. And now I can hire like this one role to cover these two roles. So, but I think having even that culture change though, like that's such a culture change of like, hey guys, don't be afraid. Every time you need new resources, like it starts with Gen AI and then it's people second. And I think that's where the world is going.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. There's this nature of the change of how companies and all these are going. We see this in like the reindustrialization and bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. And it was like my numbers are going to be off, but it's something like 70-80% of people said yes, we need this, and 20% were like, I would work in a factory. I'm like, but the problem is the factory that they have in their mind is the factory. Like, go back either to Henry Ford or the 1950s and
Yeah,
60s.
yeah.
Have you seen the Gigafactory? Have you seen the Samsung plant? The factories are not what they used to be. Like you're not doing the hammering and doing this, the single thing. You're tending to the robots. You are thinking more strategically, but you can do that. I mean, that's your point. It's a different role. I know like people at the Gigafactory, they're hiring fresh out of high school for these types of jobs. And this is one of the things I think is actually great about Austin is you have really this kind of diversity of roles that you don't have kind of what happened in the Bay Area, like the it's like if you weren't in tech or one of those like lawyer, doctor, or you were in the service, like you had no middle class.
Yes. No, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think we could talk about Austin, how much we love it and all the great things about it. But there is such diversity, not just in the jobs people do, but inside of tech. And I think it's a really fun and that mixture kind of makes something special, right? Because you're kind of not looking at it just through, and by the way, you know, there have been generations of technologists in the Bay Area that have been trained at kind of like just a handful of companies on just a handful of ways to do it. And I think in more diverse environments, there's more kind of willingness to adopt the new. And so I think it's a really fun place to be kind of building a company. So,
Well,
but yeah,
I call Austin is the frontier,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah,
really
yeah,
is that.
totally.
So it's actually a good pivot because I do want to talk a bit about Austin and kind of your opinions on. First is when I was first connected, I was like, oh, FinTech in Austin, shouldn't that be in Dallas? And that's just my observation of this. So first off, how did FinTech end up becoming in Austin? And two, is my perception of like Texas FinTech is more Dallas, or am I just actually wrong in that?
I mean, I don't know. I think like fintech is really New York and Bay Area.
Sure.
If you think about like the big fintech players, I tend to think of Dallas as kind of more of the traditional, I could say legacy, but traditional financial institutions, right? Like traditional banking, which is going to get disrupted by fintech. And then I think Austin, to your point, is more of a frontier. And I would say Austin is not like a fintech hotbed, right? It's a flavor of a whole range. And as I was kind of preparing for our conversation, it's amazing when you look at kind of who's gotten funded, everything from like to your point, hardware to software to different flavors of software. Like fintech is certainly not, it's not like Boston and biotech.
Uh-huh.
Um, but what I love about it is like we were not founded in a traditional way. Our founder, we actually didn't own our own technology when we originally founded. And that's kind of a legacy of the like payments wasn't fintech 20 years ago, right? Payments was selling terminals and knuckle busters and it then evolved into being a like kind of the most mature piece of fintech, which is super cool, like between Stripe and Adyen and I could go on and on. And so I think the thing that our founder, Amy, saw that was pressing, right, is back to that kind of customer ethos. So she started in the association space. They had a big need to collect member dues. They wanted to do it digitally with credit cards. They were like, hey, we have a lot of bar associations. Those bar associations like want to provide a way for lawyers to get paid because this is a big struggle and use digital payments. Ultimately, we ended up building our own fintech tech stack, which we have today, and we've invested a ton in, and it's going to be how we do our lending and our spend management credit card. But it was, self-funded. It was a female entrepreneur. Like women get what, 2 to 3% of funding. It was someone who really went into markets that everyone else ignored because they thought maybe, there was too much red tape or they were too hard or they were too small. They really invested in brands that lawyers could trust and then accountants could trust. They partnered with the traditional entities, associations. And then that foundation, kind of when I joined with this team and with our investors, gave us the opportunity to say, oh my gosh, we're the largest legal payments processor in the US. We have this amazing payments platform. What else can we do? Should we go into software? Because software and payments are converging. There's now an opportunity to do verticalized embedded fintech. Should we do that? And so it's a really cool company that I think never would have existed in the Bay Area. VCs would have said, let me ask my wife, you're a female founder, not to be harsh. They would have been like, legal what? It didn't become cool until like what, 18 months ago with Gen AI, and so you have this kind of amazing built in Austin story with Amy Porter kind of seeing this big opportunity that now others are trying to catch up to us on. And we've since acquired large software companies and built those. We've launched embedded fintech products, but that foundation is a very Austin story.
Well, and there's also even the B2B enterprise story in Austin has at least some rhyme, right? Like as you said, you're going after the smaller legal and accounting Zen business. It's very, very similar in terms of like we're going to go after the smaller independent entrepreneur. You've got Sana benefits. There seems to be a almost an Austin stack kind of being developed that in many ways you see it. It's almost a classic, Clay Christensen, like all of you are going after kind of the small individual entrepreneurs. And then, of course, you can see, well, then, of course, you eventually move up stack in a lot of firms, right?
Well, we're going to go into other professional verticals. We're not going up, but we can have a strategy conversation about why that is and why big law is very different than small law and all that. Yeah, well,
it's funny because Zen, when I had the chief product officer on for Zen Business about a year ago or so, and it was interesting that they had a very similar bent in that it was, we're staying kind of in this realm, and that we understand that there's almost a maturing process, and like and that when you get to X size, whatever it is, that yes, there's different technologies. And actually, my question to you would be: is you're seeing the same thing with kind of big law? Is it vertical a stack in this, or is it still or is it like no? Now we're going to go to the big horizontal and go.
Still vertical, Jason.
So I think a question then: why not? What's the appeal of going into new sectors versus going into, say, big law or big account?
Well, I mean, I think so. Big law is, look, everything about your business changes, right? I mean, it's just everything changes, right? It'd be, I don't know. We were talking about Poppy earlier, and like if they were going in, they're like a non-refrigerated soda, like asking them if they want to then launch like, restaurants. And you're like, well, it's totally different, And so like we're partnered and we actually are the market leader in legal payments for big law, but we do that through amazing partners like Aderant, which have, massively complex ERP platforms that have kind of built depth and complexity and highly configurable, hopefully non-customized, but highly configured workflows for the massive back office staffs that run these firms, right? A global firm like Wilson Sonsini is completely different than, a solo firm with one lawyer and a part-time paralegal that's taking on, 2 cases a quarter, right? And it's just a very different deal. And so that's true on kind of the customer needs side. And then you could echo that across how you then serve, like how you kind of build products, sell products, and serve those customers, right? My last business was way more enterprise and mid-market focused. And the sales cycle was much longer, much more complex. Like you needed kind of one-to-one account management. Like it's a very different deal. And so I think, the job of the CEO and the team is to figure out like what are our core strategic capabilities and how do we apply those and not get out of our so one capability is understanding lawyers, but we spend a lot of time understanding solo, small, lower, mid-sized firms, right? And we see a lot more pattern recognition in what lawyers need running firms of that size to accountants, to architects, to consultants, et cetera, than we do moving up to a 1,000-person firm. Right. And then we have partners for our FinTech products because there's there is actually a lot of ability for fintech products, which is one thing that we love, to be able to easily scale to a larger, more complex firm versus, kind of the core workflow ERP software. So,
What
yeah,
do you see the like? I mean, Sam Altman famously said we're going to see a one person $1 billion, company based on all the agentic AI, and I think
sounds so lonely, but I guess that's an introvert's dream. I don't know. I was like, one, no, I'm like, that sounds like someone's dream, not mine, but okay.
right. But the point is, we're getting these smaller and smaller
I understand.
abilities. Yeah, but yeah, no, and I see back to our point about like the legal, like that so much of the work is was just hours put in, right? It was elbow grease kind of situation. So do we see like a disruption in like the big law firms may not, I don't say exist, but like we'll see like but just seeing a much more of the two-person law firm going against the Wilsons and Cini or the Mofo or whoever, and it's just they're actually all powered differently, and then it the stack that you need to then drive that just becomes the same across, because I would think that the Wilson Cinis would get smaller and more nimble or to survive.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think your point is well taken. Like, I think we're seeing kind of like the ability to build products and I'll use an engineering example because I don't run a law firm, right? I run a software firm, a software company. And so, like, there are very real examples of, it used to take we were going to do a re-platform. This is not our company, but another company in talking to a CTO, we were going to, take 3 years to re-platform off a legacy code base onto a modern code base. We have a very complex ERP. We started with a Gen AI first approach for that big initiative. And it meant that we got it done in like half a year instead of 3 years because Gen AI is actually very good today at kind of that exact exercise. And it basically did 70% of the work that I would have had to have engineers do. And so I think you are seeing these examples that are not just about individuals having productivity gains, but fundamentally like transforming how you would take on a piece of work. And so to your point, and I have examples from other, like the research required, the review of the mass amount of documents. Like, I think we are going to see kind of like transformational levels of leverage that generative AI can provide, right? And that will remove a certain amount of man hours that are required. And so,
Have you, have
yes,
you heard of Gauntlet AI? Have you heard of Gauntlet AI here in Austin?
no, I haven't.
Oh, so like you'll blow your mind on terms of the speed. So it is they bring people in, they train them up for AI engineers, and then they go and then basically companies will come and they have to pay to bring them on. I had Austin on. They're on their second cohort. I had Austin on in December, and but they talk about like what they're doing. So like their assignment like last week or something was make a Snapchat clone in a day. This is the speed at which like AI is able to do these things. Like we could be able to make some of these products that took years and days now. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And look, I think so. I on one hand see that transformational capability. And if you were to say on a single case, could you really reshape the size of the team if you took a Gen AI first approach? I think you could. Do I think it's going to take time? And is it like a lot more complex than that if you think about kind of all the work that gets done and all the flavors of work that like a global law firm does? And I think we're going to find the limits of like how to put this, I think there is a lot of like human in like I'll go back to like sales 101. Purchasing something is ultimately an emotional decision, right? We love it to be about features and feature parity. We'd love it to be this purely intellectual decision, but like why do people care about brands, right? I mean, it's as emotional as it is. So there's like a human element into what we do. And so figuring out the kind of boundaries, conditions of like where, like where Gen AI stops and humans really have to pick up, it does feel like we're going to find some of those limits, right? And I certainly don't know where they are because we're still like figuring it out, you know?
Right, it becomes less about the computation, more about the agency, the curiosity, the creativity. That's the part where we're going to shine,
Yeah.
and you have the mass power of these tools behind you.
And I think the problem with like the chat, that not the chat, but the example that you gave is like, Snap has been around for a while, right? And like Evan Spiegel had a vision for a product and then has had the opportunity with massive amounts of capital and time and teams to refine that vision. So, this is where it's like my example was a similar one where it's like take a product, rewrite that exact product in a new code base and versus kind of the innovation, the product vision, the testing and learning. So I'm not saying we aren't going to figure out some of those applications with Gen AI, but it's a little bit of, you know, I hope you have a really good product manager and product owner having given you a really good spec with really good product design. And then I think engineering work is going to cost a lot less and it's going to take a lot less time, but it doesn't. And I think you're like legal strategy, legal nuance, actual human to human negotiations, which is usually where deals live and die. Like there's so much that is human and Gen AI is not proof. Like for example, we cannot deploy a sales agent in lieu of a salesperson today. Everything we're talking about is kind of like augmentation, right? Like agent Jason couldn't show up today to do this call. So look, we still have limits. Like let's not be
No,
naive.
and I think the Snap example, to your point, my point was not so much, it was the speed at which you could create products, not necessarily build companies. And I think it's the
But like even identify and build innovative products people want to use.
yeah,
Like they have a fully validated use case there, like where someone, it's like I'm sure Instagram is pretty easy too. Like these are
yeah,
pretty
no,
easy, obvious things that were like lightning in a bottle. Think of all the failed apps, right?
there's no argument there, and I think you're right. It's the one of the things actually I think was the speed is gives the greater experimentation is
Yeah.
okay. Maybe we can
Yeah. Yeah.
actually let's make whatever our next thing is. We can make instead of a year to make one, we can spend 2 weeks to make three and try these different things out at different
Yeah.
levels.
Yeah, and I think where we like just to pull the thread, right? If you were to kind of like look at the P&L of a company, like, COGS, cost of sales, and like cost of product and engineering, so cost to build, like those are payroll is like our biggest line item,
Mhm.
right? And if you can fundamentally think like my team can be X more impactful today, and therefore build 2x more products, we can have 2x more impactful conversations with like that. There was a good post from an HG Capital investor that said, that for the first time in decades the cost of engineering is dramatically dropping, right? And that is a huge opportunity for companies that are able to harness that. And I would say similarly, we're going to see the same thing on the cost to serve and cost to sell. And so how we harness that, some companies are going to turn it into profits. Ours are going to like our focus is on growth. So he's not wrong. And look, we have to kind of like we've been so worried as a country about retraining, people that were left behind by the first waves of the tech revolution. To circle back to we miss mining, we miss manufacturing, we're going to bring all that back. And your point's like, okay, a factory today doesn't look at all like that. And having left behind kind of vast swaths, now we don't just have to retrain those Americans, we have to retrain people that we actually thought probably 2 years ago were in the catbird seat on leveraging these tools. Like the job of an engineer today is very different than it was a year ago, completely different than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think I probably need to meet the Gauntlet AI guys, but like, like they're right. Like that whole the new wave of engineering thinking is way more like Cursor does the first pass, right? And Claude, it helps me map out the feature. And like and then that's not even looking holistically at building a whole new product, right?
I mean, I write a lot, and you obviously can tell when you see like just straight. I put something into Claude or ChatGPT, and out came these things, and the dashes and the delves and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As a writer, it's made me much more powerful as having just not only one the first pass of just like I'm going to throw ideas in. This isn't what I look like, but this is what it's going to be. This is a starting point, and then just the ability to kind of go back and forth. And I write probably 100 times more than I used to because of these tools.
Yeah, it gives you the starting point pretty much for all knowledge work, right? And it's funny, like Blinkist, I'm like, I think all your shit is just Gen AI. That's why there's no nuance. It's not compelling. I'm like, but like you've given me the Gen AI view of this. I could have gotten it from ChatGPT. Like, I think we'll start to see like where it's the starting point versus where does the human judgment and perspective and overlay take over, right? And to your point, like ChatGPT isn't like a JSON replacement, it's an augmentation.
And the understanding. I mean, it's so you have young kids, and like seeing the way that they use it, and it's funny. I was like, oh, these people are cheat. It's the people who cheat versus, like my oldest actually went and taught chess at my youngest school, and he was using it to help him come up with a lesson plan.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I
And so
love
like,
that. I
and like
love
it
it.
was the back and forth of that. And at times he was like, that's not a good thing to do. Like, so like you have to teach that now, that kind of both skepticism and understanding of these tools.
Yeah. I mean, I went to law school, right? And the Socratic method is like it's like training you to think is training you to ask questions and to give enough information to ask good questions and then to kind of interrogate the answers and then push until and in some ways that is what like we're training people on with ChatGPT. So optimistically, I'd like to think we're not training people to be stupider, right? Because I mean, it would be stupid if we just like took all that information and someone was sharing that they were coaching an engineering leader, and he's like, I mean, I got engineers that just take the cursor stuff, don't review it, and submit it, and you're like, well, that's not good. Like that's a performance conversation right there. Versus, I use this as a starting point. I have an X% code acceptance rate. This is how I'm going to make it better, and this is how I'm going to continue to kind of refine and train the model. Right.
Yeah, there was that famous, case, whatever, like a year or two ago, where the lawyer just put something in ChatGPT, put it up, and was like, "This is why ChatGPT is terrible." Like, no, that lawyer is terrible.
I know. I know. This is like, and so part of why I think we're super excited is like, look, we help lawyers run their businesses. Like, I'm not in the business of legal research. Yes, we help people manage cases, but like, there's a lot of kind of explainability that is required for lawyers to be able to trust the output from Gen AI on the practice of law side. For us, our view is like we should be much more in their flow much quicker because it's way more about business insights and intelligence. Like, don't forget to send this invoice. Did you know you only collected X%? Let's close the gap with some reminders. Like, it's way more about but lawyers, like, I think different, this is going to be where people are going to be cautious because that's like the poster child for Gen AI is still that guy where ChatGPT hallucinated case citations. He then asked it to confirm the case citations and it confirmed its own, hallucinated cases. And then he's like on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, whichever it was. And you're like, no lawyer wants to be known for that, right? So, I think there's really good firms like back to Harvey. I think it's awesome that they're partnering with Lexis. I think it's awesome that Thomson Reuters, did the kind of the big Gen AI acquisition to kind of make legal research leveraging Gen AI, but you have to have the right source data and the right boundary controls because we cannot have technology get people in trouble for those types of examples.
And then it's an interesting question we have with the data set. These are the things that are making those companies unique. Like how do you become unique as a company? It's like, well, I have access to this XYZ data set or this sensor or something to say like, okay, we're building on top of it. We may have pipes into the same horizontal technologies that everybody has. And then here's where our unique, you know, mode differentiator, whatever term you want to use, comes to play.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's going to be as we get, kind of the different use cases built by different Gen AI companies, like their ability to access the right data to build the right models and then their ability to like get the right distribution that those are going to be some of their challenges that they have versus kind of incumbents, right? Incumbents have the challenge of like urgency and do you have an innovation forward enough culture? Like we have other challenges to solve. But I do think that's going to be a big challenge for some of the startups, especially in our market, right?
Yeah. So we could definitely keep going for a long time on this, but there's so many different things. And I think I would love to probably have a lot of people in this kind of new enterprise stack back together and seeing how we're kind of looking
Yeah.
at this. But we always end with the same question.
Okay.
What's next, Austin?
What's next, Austin? Look, I'd love to see our tech ecosystem continue to mature, right? I think there's a big gap between kind of a bunch of the new startups and the more mature scaled companies. And I'd love us to see, I think I love you guys, you're having Poppy on in YPO with their CEO and co-founder, but like that's a great example of like a huge win for Austin. And I'd love to see more multi-billion dollar tech companies. Like it's lonely over here. And I'd love to see more companies at our scale and the kind of break through to the next level. And I think part of building a really healthy tech ecosystem is having the companies that then go spawn the next generation of startups. And so I'd love to see us doing that. And I'd love to see, other companies like I'm friends with Neha at Content Stack. They're such a huge local Austin success story. She's raised Katie Fang, who's also in the ed tech space. Like, I'd love to see more founders in Austin getting bigger checks, having bigger exits, and producing and really fueling this ecosystem for the next decade. So I think there's just so much more opportunity here. And it's such a special place in terms of people want to live here. We got a top 10 engineering school. We've got great, like companies that already exist. We've got investors moving here, 8VC maids, like we've got a TA, my investor moved here, or opened an office, I should say. And so it's like we have all the makings. I want to see us move to the top 5, right? Today, we're not top 5 in terms of tech cities, like based on funding. Let's get there.
Before I end, I think we will this year be top 5.
Okay.
We were number 4 in Q1.
We were.
Yeah, we were number 4 in Q1.
Are you counting? Is this because of Elon?
No, it was Ninja One, Apptronic.
Okay, good.
Sorry, X did count in that. So it's X, Apptronic, Saronic, Ninja One, all had like hundreds of millions. I don't think Q1 is sustainable. Like it was essentially our 3rd biggest year, but then you had base power and like a lot of other things going. So I think we will be fighting for 5th this year.
I love it. Let's do it. Let's grow this ecosystem.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.